and continue with Chapter 3 of Moonfleet. A Discovery. Some bold adventurers disdain the limits of their little reign, and unknown regions dare descry. Still, as they run, they look behind. They hear a voice in every wind, and snatch a fearful joy. Grey. I have said that I used often in the daytime, when not at school, to go to the churchyard, because, being on a little rise, there was the best view of the sea to be had from it, and on a fine day you could watch the French privateers creeping along the cliffs under the Snout, and lying in wait for an Indiaman or up-channel trader. There were at Moonfleet few boys of my own age, and none that I cared to make my companion, so I was given to muse alone, and did so for the most part in the open air, all the more because my aunt did not like to see an idle boy with muddy boots about her house. For a few weeks, indeed, after the day that I had surprised Elzevir and Ratsey, I kept away from the church, fearing to meet them there again, but a little later resumed my visits, and saw no more of them. Now, my favourite seat in the churchyard was the flat atop of a raised stone tomb, which stands on the south-east of the church. I have heard Mr. Glennie call it an altar tomb, and in its day it had been a fine monument, being carved round with festoons of fruit and flowers, but had suffered so much from the weather that I was never able to read the lettering on it, or to find out who had been buried beneath. Here I chose most to sit, not only because it had a flat and convenient top, but because it was screened from the wind by a thick clump of yew trees. These yews had once, I think, completely surrounded it, but had either died or been cut down on the south side, so that anyone sitting on the gravetop was snug from the weather, and yet possessed a fine prospect over the sea. On the other three sides the yews grew close and thick, embowering the tomb like the high back of a fireside chair, and many times in autumn I have seen the stone slab crimson with the fallen waxy berries, and taken some home to my aunt, who liked to taste them with a glass of sloe gin after her Sunday dinner. Others beside me, no doubt, found this tomb a comfortable seat and lookout, for there was quite a path worn to it on the south side, though all the times I had visited it I had never seen anyone there. So it came about that on a certain afternoon in the beginning of February in the year of 1758, I was sitting on this tomb looking out to sea. Though it was so early in the year, the air was soft and warm as a May day, and so still that I could hear the drumming of turnips that Gaffer George was flinging into a cart on the hillside, near half a mile away. Ever since the floods of which I have spoken, the weather had been open, but with high winds and little or no rain. Thus, as the land dried after the floods, there began to open cracks in the heavy clay soil on which Moonfleet is built, such as are usually only seen with us in the height of summer. There were cracks by the side of the path in the sea meadows between the village and the church, and cracks in the churchyard itself, and one running right up to this very tomb. It must have been past 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was for returning to tea at my aunt's, when, underneath the stone on which I sat, I heard a rumbling and crumbling, and on jumping off saw that the crack in the ground had still further widened, just where it came up to the tomb, and that the dry earth had so shrunk and settled that there was a hole in the ground a foot or more across. Now this hole reached under the big stone that formed one side of the tomb, and falling on my hands and knees and looking down it, I perceived that there was under the monument a larger cavity, into which the hole opened. I believe there never was boy yet who saw a hole in the ground, or a cave in a hill, or much more an underground passage, but longed incontinently to be into it and discover whither it led. So it was with me, and seeing that the earth had fallen enough into the hole to open a way under the stone, I slipped myself in feet foremost, dropped down onto a heap of fallen mould, and found that I could stand upright under the monument itself. Now, this was what I had expected, for I thought that there had been below this grave a vault, the roof of which had given way and let the earth fall in. But as soon as my eyes were used to the dimmer light, I saw that it was no such thing, but that the hole into which I had crept was only the mouth of a passage, which sloped gently down in the direction of the church. My heart fell to thumping with eagerness and surprise, for I thought I had made a wonderful discovery, and that this hidden way would certainly lead to great things, perhaps even to Blackbeard's hoard. For ever since Mr. Glennie's tale, I had constantly before my eyes a vision of the diamond and the wealth it was to bring me. The passage was 2 places broad, as high as a tall man, and cut through the soil without bricks or any other lining, and what surprised me most was that it did not seem deserted nor mouldy and cobwebbed, as one would expect such a place to be, but rather a well-used thoroughfare, for I could see the soft clay floor was trodden with the prints of many boots, and marked with a trail as if some heavy thing had been dragged over it. So I set down the passage, reaching out my hand before me lest I should run against anything in the dark, and sliding my feet slowly to avoid pitfalls in the floor. But before I had gone 6 paces, the darkness grew so black that I was frightened, and so far from going on was glad to turn sharp about, and see the glimmer of light that came in through the hole under the tomb. Then a horror of the darkness seized me, and before I well knew what I was about, I found myself wriggling my body up under the tombstone onto the churchyard grass, and was once more in the low evening sunlight and the soft, sweet air. Home I ran to my aunt's, for it was past tea-time, and beside that I knew I must fetch a candle if I were ever to search out the passage. And to search it I had well made up my mind, no matter how much I was scared for this moment. My aunt gave me but a sorry greeting when I came into the kitchen, for I was late and hot. She never said much when displeased, but had a way of saying nothing which was much worse, and would only reply yes or no, and that after an interval, to anything that was asked of her. So the meal was silent enough, for she had finished before I had arrived, and I ate but little myself, being too much occupied with the thought of my strange discovery, and finding, beside, the tea lukewarm and the victuals not enticing. You may guess that I said nothing of what I had seen, but made up my mind that as soon as my aunt's back was turned, I would get a candle and tinder-box and return to the churchyard. The sun was down before Aunt Jane gave thanks for what we had received, and then, turning to me, she said in a cold and measured voice, "John, I have observed that you are often out and about of nights, sometimes as late as 7:30 or 8. Now, it is not seemly for young folk to be abroad after dark, and I do not choose that my nephew should be called a gadabout. What's bred in the bone will come out in the flesh, and 'twas with such loafing that your father began his wild ways, and afterwards led my poor sister such a life as never was, till the mercy of Providence took him away." Aunt Jane often spoke thus about my father, whom I never remembered, but believe him to have been an honest man and good fellow to boot, if something given to roaming and to the contraband. "So understand," she went on, "that I will not have you out again this evening, no, nor any other evening after dusk. Bed is the place for youth when night falls, but if this seem to you too early, you can sit with me for an hour in the parlour, and I will read you a discourse of Dr. Sherlock that will banish vain thoughts, and leave you in a fit frame for a quiet sleep." So she led the way into the parlour, took the book from the shelf, put it on the table within the little circle of light cast by a shaded candle, and began. It was dull enough, though I had borne such tribulations before, and the drone of my aunt's voice would have sent me to sleep, as it had done at other times, even in a straight-backed chair, had I not been so full of my discovery, and chafed at this delay. Thus, all the time my aunt read of spiritualities and saving grace, I had my mind on diamonds and all kinds of mammon, for I never doubted that Blackbeard's treasure would be found at the end of that secret passage. The sermon finished at last, and my aunt closed the book with a stiff "good night" for me. I was for giving her my formal kiss, but she made as if she did not see me and turned away. So we went upstairs, each to our own room, and I never kissed Aunt Jane again. There was a moon 3/4 full already in the sky, and on moonlight nights I was allowed no candle to show me to bed. But on that night I needed none, for I never took off my clothes, having resolved to wait until my aunt was asleep, and then, ghosts or no ghosts, to make my way back to the churchyard. I did not dare to put off that visit even till the morning, lest some chance passer-by should light upon the hole, and so forestall me with Blackbeard's treasure. Thus I lay awake on my bed, watching the shadow of the tester-post against the whitewashed wall, and noting how it had moved by degrees as the moon went farther round. At last, just as it touched the picture of the Good Shepherd which hung over the mantelpiece, I heard my aunt snoring in her room, and knew that I was free. Yet I waited a few minutes so that she might get well on with her first sleep, and then took off my boots, and in stockinged feet slipped past her room and down the stairs. How stair, handrail, and landing creaked that night, and how my feet and body struck noisily against things seen quite well, but misjudged in the effort not to misjudge them. And yet there was the note of safety still sounding, for the snoring never ceased, and the sleeper woke not, though her waking then might have changed all my life. So I came safely to the kitchen, and there put in my pocket one of the best winter candles and the tinder box, and, as I crept out of the room, heard suddenly how loud the old clock was ticking, and looking up, saw the bright brass hand marking 10:30 on the dial. Out in the street I kept in the shadow of the houses as far as I might, though all was silent as the grave. Indeed, I think that when the moon is bright, a great hush falls always upon nature, as though she was taken up in wondering at her own beauty. Everyone was fast asleep in Moonfleet, and there was no light in any window. Only when I came opposite the Why Not, I saw from the red glow behind the curtains that the bottom room was lit up, so Elzevir was not yet gone to bed. It was strange, for the Why Not had been shut up early for many a long night past, and I crossed over cautiously to see if I could make out what was going forward. But that was not to be done, for the panes were thickly steamed over, and this surprised me more, as showing that there was a good company inside. Moreover, as I stood and listened, I could hear a mutter of deep voices inside, not as of roisterers, but of sober men, talking low. Eagerness would not let me wait long, and I was off across the meadows towards the church, though not without sad misgivings as soon as the last house was left well behind me. At the churchyard wall my courage had waned somewhat. It seemed a shameless thing to come to rifle Blackbeard's treasure, just in the very place and hour that Blackbeard loved, and as I passed the turnstile I half expected that a tall figure, hairy and evil-eyed, would spring out from the shadow on the north side of the church. But nothing stirred, and the frosty grass sounded crisp under my feet as I made across the churchyard, stepping over the graves and keeping always out of the shadows, towards the black clump of yew trees on the far side. When I got round the yews, there was the tomb standing out white against them, and at the foot of the tomb was the hole like a patch of black velvet spread upon the ground, it was so dark. Then, for a moment, I thought that Blackbeard might be lying in wait in the bottom of the hole, and I stood uncertain whether to go on or back. I could catch the rustle of the water on the beach, not of any waves, for the bay was smooth as glass, but just a lipper at the fringe, and wishing to put off with any excuse the descent into the passage, though I had quite resolved to make it, I settled with myself that I would count the water wash 20 times, and at the 20th would let myself down into the hole. Only 7 wavelets had come in when I forgot to count, for there, right in the middle of the moon's path across the water, lay a lugger moored broadside to the beach. She was about half a mile out, but there was no mistake, for though her sails were lowered, her masts and hull stood out black against the moonlight. Here was a fresh reason for delay, for surely one must consider what this craft could be, and what had brought her here. She was too small for a privateer, too large for a fishing smack, and could not be a revenue boat by her low freeboard in the waist. And, It was a strange thing for a boat to cast anchor in the midst of Moonfleet Bay, even on a night so fine as this. Then, while I watched, I saw a blue flare in the bows, only for a moment, as if a man had lit a squib and flung it overboard. But I knew from it she was a contrabandier, and signalling either to the shore or to a mate in the offing. With that, courage came back, and I resolved to make this flare my signal for getting down into the hole, screwing my heart up with the thought that if Blackbeard was really waiting for me there, 'twould be little good to turn tail now, for he would be after me and could certainly run much faster than I. Then I took one last look around, and down into the hole forthwith, the same way as I had got down earlier in the day. So on that February night, John Trenchard found himself standing in the heap of loose fallen mould at the bottom of the hole, with a mixture of courage and cowardice in his heart, but overruling all a great desire to get at Blackbeard's diamond. Out came tinderbox and candle, and I was glad indeed when the light burned up bright enough to show that no one, at any rate, was standing by my side. But there was the passage, and who could say what might be lurking there? Yet I did not falter, but set down on this adventurous journey, walking very slowly indeed, but that was from fear of pitfalls, and nerving myself with the thought of the great diamond, which surely would be found at the end of the passage. What should I not be able to do with such wealth? I would buy a nag for Mr. Glennie, a new boat for Ratsey, and a silk gown for Aunt Jane, in spite of her being so hard with me as on this night. And thus I would make myself the greatest man in Moonfleet, richer than even Mr. Maskew, and build a stone house in the sea meadows with a good prospect of the sea, and marry Grace Maskew, and live happily, and fish. I walked on down the passage, reaching out the candle as far as might be in front of me, and whistling to keep myself company, yet saw neither Blackbeard nor anyone else. All the way there were footprints on the floor, and the roof was black as with smoke of torches, and this made me fear lest some of those who had been there before might have made away with the diamond. Now, though I have spoken of this journey down the passage as though it were a mile long, and though it verily seemed so to me that night, yet I afterwards found it was not more than 20 yards or thereabouts. And then I came upon a stone wall which had once blocked the road, but was now broken through, so as to make a ragged doorway into a chamber beyond. There I stood on the rough sill of the door, holding my breath and reaching out my candle arm's length into the darkness to see what sort of place this was before I put foot into it. And before the light had well time to fall on things, I knew that I was underneath the church, and that this chamber was none other than the Mohune vault. It was a large room, much larger, I think, than the schoolroom where Mr. Glennie taught us, but not near so high, being only some 9 feet from floor to roof. I say floor, though in reality there was none, but only a bottom of soft wet sand, and when I stepped down onto it my heart beat very fiercely, for I remembered what manner of place I was entering, and the dreadful sounds which had issued from it that Sunday morning so short a time before. I satisfied myself that there was nothing evil lurking in the dark corners, or nothing visible at least, and then began to look round and note what was to be seen. Walls and roof were stone, and at one end was a staircase closed by a great flat stone at top, that same stone which I had often seen, with a ring in it in the floor of the church above. All round the sides were stone shelves with divisions between them like great bookcases, but instead of books there were coffins of the Mohunes. Yet these lay only at the sides, and in the middle of the room was something very different, for here were stacked scores of casks, kegs, and rundlets, from a storage butt that might hold 30 gallons down to a breaker that held only 1. They were marked, all of them in white paint, on the end with figures and letters that doubtless set forth the quality to those that understood. Here indeed was a discovery, and instead of picking up at the end of the passage a little brass or silver casket which had only to be opened to show Blackbeard's diamond gleaming inside, I had stumbled on the Mohune's vault and found it to be nothing but a cellar of gentlemen of the contraband. for surely good liquor would never be stored in so shy a place if it ever had paid the excise. As I walked round this stack of casks, my foot struck sharply on the edge of a butt, which must have been near empty, and straightway came from it the same hollow booming sound, only fainter, which had so frightened us in the church that Sunday morning. So it was the casks, and not the coffins, that had been knocking one against another, and I was pleased with myself, remembering how I had reasoned that coffin wood could never give that booming sound. It was plain enough that the whole place had been under water. The floor was still muddy, and the green and sweating walls showed the flood mark within 2 feet of the roof. There was a wisp or two of fine seaweed that had somehow got in, and a small crab was still alive and scuttled across the corner. Yet the coffins were but little disturbed. They lay on the shelves in rows, one above the other, and numbered 23 in all. Most were in lead, and so could never float, but of those in wood some were turned slantways in their niches, and one had floated right away and been left on the floor upside down, in a corner when the waters went back. First I fell to wondering as to whose cellar this was, and how so much liquor could have been brought in with secrecy, and how it was I had never seen anything of the contraband men, though it was clear that they had made this flat tomb the entrance to their storehouse, and I had made it my seat. Then I remembered how Ratsey had tried to scare me with talk of Blackbeard, and how Elzevir, who had never been seen at church before, was there the Sunday of the noises, and how he had looked ill at ease whenever the noise came, though he was bold as a lion, and how I had tripped upon him and Ratsey in the churchyard, and how Master Ratsey lay with his ear to the wall. And putting all these things together, and casting them up, I thought that Elzevir and Ratsey knew as much as any about this hiding-place. These reflections gave me more courage, for I considered that the tales of Blackbeard walking or digging amongst the graves had been set afloat to keep those that were not wanted from the place, and guessed now that when I saw the light moving in the churchyard that night I went to fetch Dr. Hawkins, it was no corpse candle, but a lantern of smugglers running a cargo. Then, having settled these important matters, I began to turn over in my mind how to get at the treasure, and herein was much cast down, for in this place was neither casket nor diamond, but only coffins and double hollands. So it was that, having no better plan, I set to work to see whether I could learn anything from the coffins themselves, but with little success, for the lead coffins had no names upon them, and on such of the wooden coffins as bore plates I found the writing to be Latin, and so rusted over that I could make nothing of it. Soon I wished I had not come at all, considering that the diamond had vanished into air, and it was a sad thing to be cabined with so many dead men. It moved me, too, to see pieces of banners and funeral shields, and even shreds of wreaths that dear hearts had put there a century ago. Now all ruined and rotten, some still clinging, water-sodden, to the coffins, and some trampled in the sand of the floor. I had spent some time in this bootless search, and was resolved to give up further inquiry and foot it home, when the clock in the tower struck midnight. Surely never was ghostly hour sounded in more ghostly place. Moonfleet peal was known over half the county, and the finest part of it was the clock bell. 'Twas said that in times past, when perhaps the chimes were rung more often than now, the voice of this bell had led safe home boats that were lost in the fog, and this night its clangour, mellow and profound, reached even to the vault. Bim-bom, it went, bim-bom, 12 heavy thuds that shook the walls, 12 resonant echoes that followed, and then a purring and vibration of the air, so that the ear could not tell when it ended. I was wrought up, perhaps, by the strangeness of the hour and place, and my hearing quicker than at other times, but before the tremor of the bell was quite passed away, I knew there was some other sound in the air, and that the awful stillness of the vault was broken. At first I could not tell what this new sound was, nor whence it came, and now it seemed a little noise close by, and now a great noise in the distance. and then it grew nearer and more defined, and in a moment I knew it was the sound of voices talking. They must have been a long way off at first, and for a minute that seemed as an age. They came no nearer. What a minute that was to me! Even now, so many years later, I can recall the anguish of it, and how I stood with ears pricked up, eyes starting, and a clammy sweat upon my face, waiting for those speakers to come. It was the anguish of the rabbit at the end of his burrow, with the ferret's eyes gleaming in the dark, and gun and lurcher waiting at the mouth of the hole. I was caught in a trap, and knew beside that contraband men had a way of sealing prying eyes and stilling babbling tongues. And I remembered poor Cracky Jones, found dead in the churchyard, and how men said he had met Blackbeard in the night. These were but the thoughts of a second, but the voices were nearer, and I heard a dull thud far up the passage, and knew that a man had jumped down from the churchyard into the hole. So I took a last stare round, agonizing to see if there was any way of escape, but the stone walls and roof were solid enough to crush me, and the stack of casks too closely packed to hide more than a rat. There was a man speaking now from the bottom of the hole to others in the churchyard, and then my eyes were led, as by a lodestone, to a great wooden coffin that lay by itself on the top shelf, a full 6 feet from the ground. When I saw that coffin, I knew that I was respited, for, as I judged, there was space between it and the wall behind, enough to contain my little carcass. But in a second I had put out the candle, scrambled up the shelves, half stunned my senses with dashing my head against the roof, then squeezed my body betwixt wall and coffin. There I lay on one side, with a thin and rotten plank between the dead man and me, dazed with the blow to my head, and breathing hard, while the glow of torches as they came down the passage reddened and flickered on the roof above. And that's the end of the chapter, and where I shall take the first break for today. First break. I say that every time, but that's probably the only break, because I'll come back and read some more afterwards. But yeah, that's the end of chapter 3. So let's go to a break. Salad, I see you going. Camp to catch the rest of the VOD. Hope you have a good night. Hope you have a good night too. Go, and if you're sleeping, sleep well. If not, enjoy that too. But yeah, thank you for being here. And yeah, I should take a quick break. You know what to do. Cycle those fluids. Stretch your limbs, as many as you have. And we will see you back in a bit. Goodbye for now. Hello, I should be coming back, hopefully. Yeah, there we go, good. Yeah, so the water bottle that I have, it's a water bottle, but it's like a Brita filter one. And so it's kind of designed to have the Brita filter disc in there, and I think, because I don't do that, I can't be bothered to do that, I just use filtered water anyway. It kind of gets quite manky inside very, very quickly, and it's just a little bit of a faff to clean. I'll kind of drink out of it once, and then the next day it's just not very nice inside, and so I need to go and clean it. And so I would like something that's just more designed to be like just a straight up water canister that I can more easily clean. And really that's just the long and short of it. But yes, it's on the long list of things that I need to actually just put my head down and acquire. But yeah, I hope you've had a good break. I don't know what is up with the music on this stream on OBS. I literally just made a new audio source that is identical to the other one and added it, and it works, and I don't know why. I don't know. The only thing that I can think is that I've activated some kind of, because on OBS you have the thing that there's the setting they implemented that allows you to send music, send like an audio source, and in this case it would be music, to the stream but not the VOD. So you can kind of filter it that way. So like if you're playing copyrighted music on stream, you can keep it out of the VOD and out of clips, so it's still there on stream, as a way to kind of keep yourself out of trouble on getting your stream muted and stuff. So the only thing I can think is maybe I've somehow activated that, or like enabled that somewhere, but that doesn't then explain why it's not showing up in the stream, but it would seemingly explain to me why it's like OBS is telling me that it's playing it fine, and when I monitor the audio it's playing it. There is music there, but it's just not actually making it through to Twitch. Like if there's some kind of weird permutation of those settings that is actually playing the music but not sending it to Twitch at all. I don't know. I mean, it's one way around the copyright strikes we keep getting for our actually perfectly legal music that we play. Like, not sarcasm, it's perfectly legal. These are our own versions made by Lucy of public domain classical pieces. That's fine, but they keep getting flagged up anyway. But yeah, that's a bunch of post-break talking. I have even more legal now, exactly. Now with extra legality. Which the more we insist on it, the more guilty it sounds. But genuinely, it's legit. It's fine. But yeah, I've refreshed. I have hydrated. I cannot keep water at the desk after that time I washed my laptop. But I'm not drinking tea because that dries me out. Funnily enough, it'll do that. But yeah, I'm back to carry on with this, and I think, because that one felt like quite a longish chapter, and I think this next one might also be quite long. Long enough. So I shall see how I go. I might just do one more chapter, might stretch it to 2, not sure. I'm not getting through this anywhere near as fast as I thought I would do. My puny chapters, yeah. I'm sort of, in my head, going to read that in Morbo's voice from Futurama. Well, sure, Dumas might laugh at me, but he's the one with that name, so really, I get to laugh loudest. Yeah, so I'm going to carry on with this. It might have just 1 or 2 chapters, or might just have 1 chapter, could stretch it to 2, but the longer I take, the less we get, so I might as well get started. This is Chapter 4, In the Vault. Let us hob and nob with death. Tennyson. Though nothing of the vault except the roof was visible from where I lay, and so I could not see these visitors, yet I heard every word spoken, and soon made out one voice as being Master Ratsey's. This discovery gave me no surprise, but much solace, for I thought that if the worst happened and I was discovered, I should find one friend with whom I could plead for life. "It is well the earth gave way," the sexton was saying, "on a night when we were here to find it. I was in the graveyard myself after midday, and all was snug and tight then. 'Twould have been awkward enough to have the hole stand open through the day for any passer-by to light on." There were 4 or 5 men in the vault already, and I could hear more footsteps coming down the passage, and guessed from their heavy footsteps that they were carrying burdens. There was a sound, too, of dumping kegs down on the ground with a swish of liquor inside them, and then the noise of casks being removed. "I thought we should have a fall there ere long," Ratsey went on, "what with this drought parching the ground and the trampling at the edge when we move out the side stone to get in. But there is no mischief done beyond what can be easily made good. Gravestone or 2 and a few spades of earth will make all sound again. Leave that to me." "Be careful what you do," rejoined another man's voice that I did not know, "lest someone see you digging and sent us out." "Make your mind easy," Ratsey said. "I have dug too often in this graveyard for any to wonder if they see me with a spade." Then the conversation broke off, and there was little more talking. Only a noise of men going backwards and forwards and putting down of kegs, and the hollow gurgle of good liquor being poured from the breakers into the casks. By and by, fumes of brandy began to fill the air and climb to where I lay, overcoming the mouldy smell of decayed wood and the dampness of the green walls. It may have been that these fumes mounted to my head and gave me courage not my own, but so it was that I lost something of the stifling fear that had gripped me, and could listen with more ease to what was going forward. There was a pause in the carrying to and fro, and they were talking again now, and someone said, "I was in Dorchester 3 days ago, and heard men say it would go hard with the poor chaps who had the brush with the Elector last summer. Judge Barentine comes on Assize next week, and that old fox Maskew was driven down to Taunton to get at him before and coach him back, making out to him that the law's arm is weak in these parts against the contraband, and must be strengthened by some wholesome hangings." 1 second, Joey wants to come in. Because, of course. I return, and will probably be distracted by a cat that wants to jump up on my lap. "They are a cruel pair," another put in, "and we shall have new gibbets on Ridgedown for leading lights. Once I get even with Maskew, the other may go hang, aye, and they may hang me too." "The devil send him to meet me one dark night on the down alone," said someone else, "and I will give him a pistol's mouth to look down, and spoil his face for him." "No, thou wilt not," said a deep voice, and then I knew that Elzevir was there too. "None shall lay a hand on Maskew but I. So mark that, lad, that when his day of reckoning comes, 'tis I will reckon with him." Then for a few minutes I did not pay much heed to what was said, being terribly straitened for room, and cramped with pain from lying so long in one place. The thick smoke from the pitch torches too came curling across the roof and down upon me, making me sick and giddy with its evil smell and taste. And though all was very dim, I could see my hands were black with oily smuts. At last I was able to wriggle myself over without making too much noise, and felt a great relief in changing sides, but gave such a start as made the coffin creak again at hearing my own name. "There is a boy of Trenchard's," said a voice that I thought was Parmiter's, who lived at the bottom of the village. "There is a boy of Trenchard's that I mistrust. He is forever wandering in the graveyard, and I have seen him a score of times sitting on this tomb and looking out to sea. This very night, when the wind fell at sundown and we were hung up with sails flapping 3 miles out, and waited for the dark to get the sweeps, I took my glass to scan the coastline, and lo, here on the tomb top sits Master Trenchard. I could not see his face, but knew him by his cut, and feared the boy sits there to play spy and then tells Maskew." "You're right," said Greening of Ringstave, for I knew his slow drawl. "And many a time when I have sat in the wood and watched the manor to see Maskew safe at home before we ran a cargo, I have seen this boy too go round and about the place with a hangdog look, scanning the house as if his life depended on it." 'Twas very true what Greening said, for of a summer evening I would take the path that led up Weatherbeach Hill behind the manor, both because 'twas a walk that had a good prospect in itself, and also a sweet charm for me, namely the hope of seeing Grace Maskew. And there I often sat upon the stile that ends the path and opens on the down, and watched the old half-ruined house below, and sometimes saw white-frocked Gracie walking on the terrace in the evening sun, and sometimes in returning, passed her window near enough to wave a greeting. And once, when she had the fever and Dr. Hawkins came twice a day to see her, I had no heart for school, but sat on that stile the livelong day, looking at the gabled house where she was lying ill. And Mr. Glennie never rated me for playing truant, nor told Aunt Jane, guessing, as I thought afterwards, the cause, and having once been young himself. 'Twas but boy's love, yet serious for me, and on the day she lay near death, I made so bold as to stop Dr. Hawkins on his horse and ask him how she did, and he, bearing with me for the eagerness that he read in my face, bent down over his saddle and smiled, and said my playmate would come back to me again. So it was quite true that I had watched the house, but not as a spy, and would not have borne tales to old Maskew for anything that could be offered. Then Ratsey spoke up for me, and said, "'Tis a false scent. The boy is well enough and simple, and has told me many a time he seeks the churchyard because there is a fine view to be had there of the sea, and 'tis the sea he loves. A month ago, when the high tide set, and this vault was so full of water that we could not get in, I came with Elzevir to make out if the floods were going down inside, or what eddy 'twas that set the casks tapping one against another. So as I lay on the ground with my ear glued close to the wall, who should march round the church but John Trenchard, Esquire, not treading delicately like King Agag, or spying, just come on a voyage of discovery for himself. For, in the church on Sunday, when we heard the tapping in the vault below, my young gentleman was scared enough, but afterwards, being told by Parson Glennie, who should know better, that such noises were not made by ghosts, but by the Mohunes at sea in their coffins, he plucks up heart, and comes down on the Monday to see if they are still afloat. So there he caught me lying like a zany on the ground. You may guess I stood at attention soon enough, but told him I was looking at the founds to see if they wanted underpinning from the floods. And so I set his mind at ease, for 'tis a simple child, and packed him off to get my dubbing hammer. And I think the boy will not be here so often now to frighten honest Parmiter, for I have weaved him some pretty tales of Blackbeard, and he has a wholesome scare of meeting the colonel. But after dark, I pledged my life that neither he nor any other in the town would pass the churchyard wall, no, not for £1,000. I heard him chuckling to himself, and the others laughed loudly too, when he was telling how he palmed me off. But he laughs loudest who laughs last, thought I, and should have chuckled too, were it not for making the coffin creak. And then, to my surprise, Elzevir spoke. The lad is a brave lad. I would he were my son. He is David's age, and he will make a good sailor later on. They were simple words, yet pleasing to me, for Elzevir spoke as if he meant them, and I had got to like him a little in spite of all his grimness, and beside that was sorry for his grief over his son. I was moved by what he said, that for a moment I was for jumping up and calling out to him that I lay here and liked him well, but then thought better of it, and so kept still. The carrying was over, and I fancy they were all sitting on the ends of kegs or leaning up against the pile, but could not see, and was still much troubled with the torch smoke, though now and then I caught through it a whiff of tobacco, which showed that some were smoking. Then Greening, who had a singing voice for all his drawl, struck up with, "Says the captain to the crew, we have slipped the revenue." But Ratsey stopped him with a sharp, "No more of that. The words aren't to our taste tonight, but come as wry as if the parson called Old Hundred and I tuned up with Venny." I knew he meant the last verse with a hanging touch in it, but Greening was for going on with the song until some others broke in too, and he saw that the company would have none of it. Excuse me 1 second. Not but what the labourer is worthy of his hire, went on Master Ratsey, so spoil that little breaker of Schiedam and send a rum around to keep off midnight chills. He loved a glass of the good liquor well, and with him 'twas always the same reasoning, namely to keep off the chills, though he chopped the words to suit the season, and now 'twas autumn, now winter, now spring or summer chills. They must have found glasses, though I could not remember to have seen any in the vault, for a minute later Fugleman Ratsey spoke again. Now, lads, glasses full and bumpers for a toast, and here's to Blackbeard, to Father Blackbeard, who watches over our treasure better than he did over his own. For were it not the fear of him that keeps off idle feet and prying eyes, we should have the gaugers in, and our store ransacked 20 times. So he spoke, and it seemed there was a little halting at first, as of men not liking to take Blackbeard's name in Blackbeard's place, or raise the devil by mocking at him. But then some of the bolder shouted, "Blackbeard!" and so the more timid chimed in, and in a minute there were a score of voices calling, "Blackbeard! Blackbeard!" till the place rang again. Then Elzevir cried out angrily, "Silence! Are you mad, or has the liquor mastered you? Are you revenue men that you dare shout and roister, or contrabandiers with the lugger in the offing, and your life in your hand? You make noise enough to wake folk in Moonfleet from their beds." "Tut, man," retorted Ratsey testily, "and if they waked they would but pull the blankets tight about their ears, and say 'twas Blackbeard piping his crew of lost Mohunes to help him dig for treasure." Yet for all that 'twas plain that Block ruled the roost, for there was silence for a minute, and then one said, "Aye, Master Elzevir is right. Let us away. The night is far spent, and we have nothing but the sweeps to take the lugger out of sight by dawn." So the meeting broke up, and the torchlight grew dimmer and died away as it had come in, a red flicker on the roof, and the footsteps sounded fainter as they went up the passage, until the vault was left to the dead men and me. Yet for a very long time, it seemed hours after all had gone, I could hear a murmur of distant voices, and knew that some were talking at the end of the passage, and perhaps considering how the landslip might best be restored. So, while I heard them thus conversing, I dared not descend from my perch, lest someone might turn back to the vault, though I was glad enough to sit up and ease my aching back and limbs. Yet, in the awful blackness of the place, even the echo of these human voices seemed a kindly and blessed thing, and a certain shrinking loneliness fell on me that they ceased at last, and all was silent. Then I resolved I would be off at once, and get back to the moonlight bed that I had left hours ago, having no stomach for more treasure hunting, and being glad indeed to be still left with the treasure of life. Thus, sitting where I was, I lit my candle once more, and then clambered across that great coffin which, for 2 hours or more, had been a mid-wall of partition between me and danger. But to get out of the niche was harder than to get in, for now that I had a candle to light me, I saw that the coffin, though sound enough to out-of-view, was wormed through and through, and little better than a rotten shell. So it was that I had some ado to get over it, not daring either to kneel upon it, or to bring much weight to bear with my hand, lest it should go through. And now, having got safely across, I sat for an instant on that narrow ledge of the stone shelf which projected beyond the coffin on the vault side, and made ready to jump forward onto the floor below. And how it happened I know not, but there I lost my balance, and as I slipped the candle flew out of my grasp. Then I clutched at the coffin to save myself, but my hand went clean through it, and so I came to the ground in a cloud of dust and splinters, having only got hold of a wisp of seaweed or a handful of those draggled funeral trappings which were strewn about the place. The floor in the vault was sandy, and so, though I fell crookedly, I took but little harm beyond a shaking, and soon, pulling myself together, set to strike my flint and blow the match into a flame to search for the fallen candle. Yet, All the time I kept in my fingers this handful of light stuff, and when the flame burnt up again, I held the thing against the light and saw that it was no wisp of seaweed, but something black and wiry. For a moment I could not gather what I had hold of, but then gave a start that nearly sent the candle out, and perhaps a cry, and let it drop as if it were red-hot iron, for I knew that it was a man's beard. Now, when I saw that, I felt a sort of throttling fright, as though one had caught hold of my heartstrings, and so many and such strange thoughts rose in me that the blood went pounding round and round in my head, as it did once afterwards when I was fighting with the sea and near drowned. Surely to have in my hand the beard of any dead man in any place was bad enough, but worse 1,000 times in such a place as this, and to know on whose face it had grown. For almost before I fully saw what it was, I knew that it was Blackbeard, which had given Colonel John Mohune his nickname, and this was his great coffin that I hid behind. I had lain, therefore, all that time cheek by jowl with Blackbeard himself, with only a thin shell of tinderwood to keep him from me, and now had thrust my hand into his coffin and plucked away his beard, so that if ever wicked men have power to show themselves after death, and still to work evil, one would guess that he would show himself now and fall upon me. Thus a sick dread got hold of me, and had I been a woman or a girl, I think I should have swooned, but being only a boy, and not knowing how to swoon, did the next best thing, which was to put myself as far as might be from the beard, and make for the outlet. Yet had I scarce set foot in the passage when I stopped, remembering how once already this same evening I had played the coward, and run home scared with my own fears. So I was brought up for very shame, and beside that thought how I had come to this place to look for Blackbeard's treasure, and might have gone away without knowing even so much as where he lay, had not chance first led me to lie down by his side, and afterwards placed my hand upon his beard. And surely this could not be chance alone, but must rather be the finger of Providence guiding me to that which I desired to find. This consideration somewhat restored my courage, and after several feints to return, advances, stoppings, and panics, I was in the vault again, walking carefully round the stack of barrels, and fearing to see the glimmer of the candle fall upon that beard. There it was upon the sand, and holding the candle nearer to it with a certain caution, as though it would spring up and bite me, I saw it was a great full black beard, more than a foot long, but going grey at the tips, and had, at the back, keeping it together, a thin tissue of dried skin, like the false parting which Aunt Jane wore under her cap on Sundays. This I could see as it lay before me, for I did not handle or lift it, but only peered into it with the candle on all sides, busying myself the while with thoughts of that man of whom it had once been part. In returning to the vault, I had no very sure purpose in mind, only a vague surmise that this finding of Blackbeard's coffin would somehow lead to the finding of his treasure. But as I looked at the beard and pondered, I began to see if anything was to be done. I began to see that if anything was to be done, it must be by searching in the coffin itself, and the clearer this became to me, the greater was my dislike to set about such a task. So I put off the evil hour, by feigning to myself that it was necessary to make a careful scrutiny of the beard, and thus wasted at least 10 minutes. But at length, seeing that the candle was burning low, and could certainly last little more than half an hour, and considering that it must now be getting near dawn, I buckled to the distasteful work of rummaging the coffin. Nor had I any need to climb up onto the top shelf again, but standing on 1 foot beneath, found my head and arms well on a level with the search. And beside that, the task was not so difficult as I had thought, for in my fall I had broken off the head end of the lid, and brought away the whole of that side that faced the vault. Now, any lad of my age, and perhaps some men too, might well have been frightened to set about such a matter as to search in a coffin, and if any had said, a few hours before, that I should ever have courage to do this by night in the Mohune vault, I would not have believed him. Yet here I was, and had advanced along the path of terror so gradually, and as it were foot by foot in the past night, that when I came to this final step, I was not near so scared as when I first felt my way into the vault. It was not the first time either that I had looked on death, but had, indeed, always a leaning to such sights and matters, and had seen corpses washed up from the Darius and other wrecks, and besides that had helped Ratsey to case some poor bodies that had died in their beds. The coffin was, as I have said, of great length, and the side being removed I could see the whole outline of the skeleton that lay in it. I say the outline, for the form was wrapped in a woolen or flannel shroud, so that the bones themselves were not visible. The man that lay in it was little short of a giant, measuring, as I guessed, a full 6.5 feet, and the flannel having sunk in over the belly, the end of the breastbone, the hips, knees, and toes were very easy to make out. The head was swathed in linen bands that had been white but were now stained and discoloured with damp, but of this I shall not speak more, and beneath the chin-cloth the beard had once escaped. The clutch which I had made to save myself in falling had torn away this chin-band and let the lower jaw drop on the breast, but little else was disturbed, and there was Colonel John Mohune resting as he had been laid out a century ago. I lifted that portion of the lid which had been left behind, and reached over to see if there was anything hid on the other side of the body, but had scarce let the light fall in the coffin when my heart gave a great bound, and all fear left me in the flush of success, for there I saw what I had come to seek. And 1 second, Joey wishes to leave. I have returned. Where on the page was I? Hang on. How have I lost my place so badly? Saw what I'd come to seek. There we go. On the breast of this silent and swathed figure lay a locket attached to the neck by a thin chain, which passed inside the linen bandages. A whiter portion of the flannel showed how far the beard had extended, but locket and chain were quite black, though I judged that they were made of silver. The shape of this locket was not unlike a crown piece, only 3 times as thick, and as soon as I set eyes upon it I never doubted but that inside would be found the diamond. It was then that a great pity came over me for this thin shadow of a man, thinking rather what a fine, tall gentleman Colonel Mohune had once been, and a good soldier no doubt besides, than that he had wasted a noble estate and played traitor to the king. And then I reflected that it was all for the bit of flashing stone which lay as I hoped within the locket, that he had sold his honour, and wished that the jewel might bring me better fortune than had fallen to him, or at any rate that it might not lead me into such miry paths. Yet such thoughts did not delay my purpose, and I possessed myself of the locket easily enough, finding a hasp in the chain, and so drawing it out from the linen folds. I had expected, as I moved the locket, to hear the jewel rattle in the inside, but there was no sound, and then I thought that the diamond might cleave to the side with damp, or perhaps be wrapped in wool. Scarcely was the locket well in my hand before I had it undone, finding a thumb nick whereby, after a little persuasion, the back, though rusted, could be opened on a hinge. My breath came very fast, and I shook so that I had a difficulty to keep my thumbnail in the nick, yet hardly was it opened before exalted expectation gave place to deepest disappointment. For there lay all the secret of the locket disclosed, and there was no diamond, no, nor any other jewel, and nothing at all except a piece of folded paper. Then I felt like a man who has played away all his property and stakes his last crown, heavy-hearted, yet hoping against hope that luck may turn, and that with this piece he may win back all his money. So it was with me, for I hoped that this paper might have written on it directions for the finding of the jewel, and that I might yet rise from the table a winner. It was but a frail hope, and quickly dashed, for when I had smoothed the creases and spread out the piece of paper in the candlelight, there was nothing to be seen except a few verses from the Psalms of David. The paper was yellow and showed a lattice of folds where it had been pressed into the locket, but the handwriting, though small, was clear and neat, and there was no mistaking a word of what was there set down. 'Twas so short I could read it at once. The days of our age are 60 years and 10, and though men be so strong that they come to 80 years, yet is their strength then but labour and sorrow, so soon passeth it away, and we are gone. Psalm 90, verse 21. And as for me, my feet are almost gone, my treading are well nigh slipped. Psalm 73, verse 6. But let not the water flood drown me, neither let the deep swallow me up. Psalm 69, verse 11. So, going through the vale of misery, I shall use it for a well, till the pools are filled with water. Psalm 84, verse 14. For thou hast made the north and the south, Tabor and Hermon shall rejoice in thy name. Psalm 89, verse 6. So here was an end to great hopes, and I was, after all, to leave the vault no richer than I had entered it. For, look at it as I might, I could not see that these verses could ever lead to any diamond. And though I might otherwise have thought of ciphers or secret writing, yet remembering what Mr. Glennie had said, that Blackbeard after his wicked life desired to make a good end, and sent for a parson to confess him, I guessed that such pious words had been hung round his neck as a charm to keep the spirits of evil away from his tomb. I was disappointed enough, but before I left picked up the beard from the floor, though it sent a shiver through me to touch it, and put it back in its place on the dead man's breast. I restored also such pieces of the coffin as I could get at, but could not make much of it. So left things as they were, trusting that those who came there next would think the wood had fallen to pieces by natural decay. But the locket I kept, and hung about my neck under my shirt, both as being a curious thing in itself, and because I thought that if the good words inside it were strong enough to keep off bad spirits from Blackbeard, they would also be strong enough to keep Blackbeard from me. When this was done, the candle had burnt so low that I could no longer hold it in my fingers, and was forced to stick it on a piece of the broken wood, and so carry it before me. But after all, I was not to escape from Blackbeard's clutches so easily, for when I came to the end of the passage, and was prepared to climb up into the churchyard, I found that the hole was stopped, and that there was no exit. I understood now how it was that I had heard talking so long after the company had left the vault, for it was clear that Ratsey had been as good as his word, and that the falling in of the ground had been repaired before the contraband men went home that night. At first I made light of the matter, thinking I should be able to dislodge this new work, and so find a way out. But when I looked more narrowly into the business, I did not feel so sure, for they had made a sound job of it, putting one very heavy burial slab at the side to pile earth against till the hole was full, and then covering it with another. These were both of slate, and I knew whence they came, for there were a dozen or more of such disused and weather-worn covers laid up against the north side of the church, and every one of them a good burden for 4 men. Yet I hoped by grouting at the earth below it to be able to dislodge the stone at the side, but while I was considering how best to begin, the candle flickered, the wick gave a sudden lurch to one side, and I was left in darkness. Thus my plight was evil indeed, for I had nothing now to burn to give me a light, and knew that 'twas no use setting to grout till I could see to go about it. Moreover, the darkness was of that black kind that is never found beneath the open sky, no, not even on the darkest night, but lurks in close and covered places, and strains the eyes in trying to see into it. Yet I did not give way, but settled to wait for the dawn, which must, I knew, be now at hand, for then I thought enough light would come through the chinks of the tomb above to show me how to set to work. Nor was I even much scared, as one who, having been in peril of life from the contraband men for a spy, and in peril from evil ghosts for rifling Blackbeard's tomb, deemed it a light thing to be left in the dark to wait an hour till morning. So I sat down on the floor of the passage, which, if damp, was at least soft, and being tired with what I had gone through, and not used to miss a night's rest, fell straight away to sleep. How long I slept I cannot tell, for I had nothing to guide me to the time, but woke at length, and found myself still in darkness. I stood up and stretched my limbs, but did not feel as one refreshed by wholesome sleep, but sick and tired with pains in back, arms, and legs, as if beaten or bruised. I have said I was still in darkness, yet it was not the blackness of the last night, and looking up into the inside of the tomb above, I could see the faintest line of light at one corner, which showed the sun was up. For this line of light was the sunlight filtering slowly through a crevice at the joining of the stones, but the sides of the tomb had been fitted much closer than I reckoned, for it was plain there would never be light in this place enough to guide me to my work. All this I considered as I rested on the ground, for I had sat down again, feeling too tired to stand. But as I kept my eye on the narrow streak of light, I was much startled, for I looked at the southwest corner of the tomb, and yet was looking towards the sun. This I gathered from the tone of the light, and although there was no direct outlet to the air, and only a glimmer came in, as I have said, yet I knew certainly that the sun was low in the west, and falling full upon this stone. Here was a surprise, and a sad one for me, for I perceived that I had slept away a day, and that the sun was setting for another night. And yet it mattered little, for night or daytime there was no light to help me in this horrible place, and though my eyes had grown accustomed to the gloom, I could make out nothing to show me where to work. So I took out my tinder-box, meaning to fan the match into a flame, and to get at least one moment's look at the place, and then to set to digging with my hands. But as I lay asleep, the top had been pressed off the box, and the tinder got loose in my pocket, and though I picked the tinder out easily enough, and got it in the box again, yet the salt damps of the place had soddened it in the night, and spark by spark fell idle from the flint. And then it was that I first perceived the danger in which I stood, for there was no hope of kindling a light, and I doubted now whether even in the light I could have done much to dislodge the great slab of slate. I began to also feel very hungry, as not having eaten for 24 hours. And worse than that, there was a parching thirst and dryness in my throat, and nothing with which to quench it. Yet there was no time to be lost if I was ever to get out alive, and so I groped with my hands against the side of the grave until I made out the bottom edge of the slab, and then fell to grubbing beneath it with my fingers. But the earth, which the day before had looked light and loamy to the eye, was stiff and hard enough when one came to tackle it with naked hands, and in an hour's time I had done little more than further weary myself and bruise my fingers. Then I was forced to rest, and sitting down on the ground, saw that the glimmering streak of light had faded, and that the awful blackness of the previous night was creeping up again. And now I had no heart to face it, being cowed with hunger, thirst, and weariness, and so flung myself upon my face that I might not see how dark it was, and groaned for very lowness of spirit. Thus I lay for a long time, but afterwards stood up and cried aloud, and shrieked if anyone should haply hear me, calling to Mr. Glennie and Ratsey, and even Elzevir by name, to save me from this awful place. But there came no answer except the echo of my own voice, sounding hollow and far off down in the vault. So in despair I turned back to the earth wall below the slab, and scrabbled at it with my fingers, till my nails were broken and the blood ran out, having all the while a sure knowledge, like a cord twisted round my head, that no effort of mine could ever dislodge the great stone. And thus the hours passed, and I shall not say more here, for the remembrance of that time is still terrible, and besides, No words could ever set forth the anguish I then suffered, yet did slumber come sometimes to my help. For even while I was working at the earth, sheer weariness would overtake me, and I sank onto the ground and fell asleep. And still the hours passed, and at last I knew by the glimmer of light in the tomb above that the sun had risen again, and a maddening thirst had hold of me. And then I thought of all the barrels piled up in the vault, and of the liquor that they held, and stuck, not because 'twas spirit, for I would scarce have paused to sate that thirst even with molten lead. So I felt my way down the passage back to the vault, and recked not of the darkness, nor of Blackbeard and his crew, if only I could lay my lips to liquor. Thus I groped about the barrels till near the top of the stack. My hand struck on the spile of a keg, and drawing it, I got my mouth to the hold. What the liquor was, I do not know, but it was not so strong that I could swallow it in great gulps, and found it less burning than my burning throat. But when I turned to get back to the passage, I could not find the outlet, and fumbled round and round until my brain was dizzy, and I fell senseless to the ground. And I think at the end of that chapter, yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it, on a cliffhanger.